Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sanjeev Mota from B&K Securities. On behalf of B&K, I welcome all of you to this session on thought leadership. We have with us Mr. Berend Odink, currently the CFO, and as he mentioned just now, for maybe a couple of more days here in UB in India, and he's moving on from here to the group. And thanks so much, Berend, for taking time, and especially given that it's last few days, and I'm sure you're quite busy. So really, thank you. And we also have Parin Tanna, who's our sector head. So between me and Berend will ask questions. If any participant has any questions, you could put it on the chat, and we'll make sure we'll ask. So Ben, maybe I guess given that it's last few days here, maybe that's kind of where we can start. So one thing that I was just trying to understand, you have another person coming in now from the group. So in terms of how does this work? So as a role of a CFO, what given that it's reasonably a cash-rich company now, especially, what other than financials, what is the role really that you guys play here in the company? So maybe you can talk a bit about that, and then I have a follow-up on that.
Yeah, sure. So I think first of all, if you're kind of in my role, like doing an assignment as a person coming from another market, I think the idea is always to leave the company in a better shape and form than when you started the role. Now that can come across various dimensions. Obviously, financial performance is a very important one, but we also focus a lot within Heineken UBL on kind of processes, efficiency, control environment, those kind of topics. Also, the business partnering to the wider company in terms of performance is very important. Of course, an important part of the change in the last few years was when Heineken obtained majority ownership last year in June. So we went through quite an intensive process of transition and integration. So a lot of alignments, changes, integration work took place. And me coming from the kind of Heineken backdrop, that of course you have an important role to explain, educate, guide as to what are those Heineken standards and how are they applicable, maybe not applicable sometimes to the context of the Indian market. So those are important elements. So to your question, yeah, finance, of course, as a CFO, would always very much focus, first of all, of course, on performance and results and controls. But it goes quickly, I would say, also to a wider business partnering element around strategy, around budgets, around business cases going forward. And that's also personally a part of the role I really like, because yeah, so trying to improve and drive the business in a certain direction, and it's not only about quarterly results or monthly results, etc. Although they are important, but it's only, I would say, a part of the role.
Right. Great. So maybe the question I had here was: is 3 years, given the complexity of the Indian market, is 3 years a long enough time to be able to do this? Or is it also because now that it's fully integrated, maybe things would change going from here, the way you guys look at it?
Yeah, I think you have various arguments for and against 3 years. Should it be longer or not? I think personally, if I look back, my roles, I've always done them either 3 or 4 years. So I don't think there's a magic number or always the right length for any type of assignment. I think if we look at the phase today, of course, COVID, it seems now a little bit past us. The integration, we've now 1 year on. So I think it's a good moment to hand over the reins and for a successor to come in and put his points of emphasis and focus on the role. I think that is a healthy development, where of course everyone comes with their own experience, their own views. So I think there's always a risk if you stay too long that you might not spot the relevant points of attention that could be there. So to me, it makes sense, and yeah, of course you can always debate 1 year more or less. Is that good enough? But I would say in general within Heineken, the standard is around 3 years, so that seems to be the practice adopted for many years.
Right. Fair point. So you also mentioned about given that now Heineken is now a full like majority owner of the company, a lot of processes and stuff are you guys are looking at. I think even in the last earnings call, you talked about 2 states where you guys are working on in terms of doing it. So if you can talk a bit more detail in terms of what is exactly the processes that you guys are trying to look at, and what can change or improve from here on some of these things. So maybe you can dwell a bit deeper on that.
Yeah, so I think the background is, of course, that Heineken has been a shareholder in business for some 10 years, more than 10 years. But given the step to majority ownership is also an important element where we will, as UBL, get consolidated into the Heineken accounts. Then it starts up also a closer collaboration, all kind of topics, for example, the monthly results, the strategic planning, the sort of forward-looking budgets and 3-year plan. So that's one element. But across all functions, I think you would have to imagine that there's a lot closer alignment and collaboration. So whether it's about the brand portfolio, about the marketing activities, the approach and the capabilities in the sales front, the supply chain, let's say benchmarks, quality, sign-off assurance, processes for technology, for water consumption, HR processes, control environment within finance. So I would say all the angles that would be reviewed to say, hey, is this the best in class? Can we adopt something, or is something from the UBL business, relevant for other parts of the Heineken business? So it cuts quite wide and across all the functions. And on the one hand, we've said, yeah, we're now 1 year on, and a lot of the key activities have taken place. But yeah, my experience, such a kind of integration is never really done at a formal point in time where you say now everything is fully there. No, there will be always further topics and further elements to explore. But in terms of changes for the business, I think it's not going to be a revolution, but more maybe an evolution, because there has been a long history of alignment. Key strategic pillars of the company being category penetration, about secondly the brand portfolio and premiumization, about cost and efficiency, value extraction, sustainability, ESG agenda, the people and culture agenda. So all those elements are very much reconfirmed and remain very much the core strategic pillars. But the programs behind it probably are now richer and more elaborated, in the sense that it's easier to access some of the Heineken playbooks, some of the Heineken programs on various of these components. Collaboration with Heineken experts in those fields is now a little bit easier. So I think that leads to hopefully an acceleration in some elements, or better benchmarks if you, for example, at cost or brewery efficiencies or route to market models. So all those things I think can be always sharpened and brought to the market maybe more quicker, etc. So that is the idea that we, of course, remain very relevant for what is particular about the Indian beer market. At the same time, take the global learnings from other markets. That of course every market is unique, but at the same time, we know that beer markets develop to a similar pattern over time. That might take 2-3 years, but it might even talk about decades. So I think in that sense, Heineken has, of course, a lot of experience with the development of beer markets across the world, and that is what we're now looking to tap into as well, to make sure the journey for UBL is even accelerated from here on.
Sure. So, Ben, just so when you go back and let's say the global CEO asks you about Indian market and says, "What do you think is the potential? What have you gathered over last 3 years? Where do you see the big opportunities for India is, and what can Heineken as a group do here in a better way?"
Yeah. Also, I think the good part is I don't need to convince our CEO or anything. I mean, the fact that they've invested so much additional money into the market in India shows, I think, also the confidence and the expectations they see for the Indian beer market. But I think, yeah, the expectations are really also reflected in the strategy that we pursue. So it's really about developing more and more the overall category. That is first and foremost the idea, and then I think there are various components to that. So one of course is the regulatory side to get better use the business environment for operating and kind of growing the beer market. There's an element of the brand portfolio there, so more premium, more accessible products for different categories, different parts of the consumer base, different occasions in the market, and I think there we see more and more examples of consumers adapting and enjoying, of course, the beer category. So I think there's a lot of positives for that. Of course, it remains small versus other like the spirits category today. But yeah, you can look at it the glass half full or half empty. I look at it as half full in the sense there's yes, people in India to a certain segment are open to alcohol, and within that, I think we see it changing more and more to beer versus spirits, where beer is much more about moderation, maybe also more the social element, and I think those are all cues that are more and more appealing to younger generations coming into the legal drinking age that they pursue it for those reasons. So the other element I would say is also the imagery of the category. So where we know that some elements are not yet that strongly developed, but other elements are becoming more and more, like if you look at how shops are operated, how some of the on-trade is developing, how more and more, I think, beers can have their role in society. And of course, not all parts of society will be open to that, but I think more and more headway is made there. So I think that kind of normalization of what a beer consumption could look like, what a product could feature in someone's consumption pattern. I think steps have been made and continue to be made, and I think that that bodes well for the opportunity we see for the total beer market in India.
Sure. Thanks. So Berend, if I look at, you've touched upon, your regulatory part a couple of times in what you said. If I look at from a regulatory perspective, India, and with your experience here now, where do you see India's, like how difficult regulation is? If I look at, rest of the world versus where we are in India, is India much, much more tougher regulatory market, or you have similarities in other parts of the world? If you can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I think in my experience, of course, I've seen a couple of other beer markets in more detail, not all beer markets across the globe to the same depth, but I would definitely categorize India as one of the most regulated beer markets. And of course, it's very common across the world to have excise, to have defined ways about routes to market, the tier 3 structure in the US or other markets. So that's not unique, but the fact that it's on a state level within India, it's regulatory very complex. It's often changing. Goes to all the points from transport of products, pricing of products, distribution, label registration, how many shifts you can operate. So it cuts across the whole process of from producing to final point of sale, and that makes it a very challenging environment to operate in. I think the strength of the business and the team in UBL is that they have been kind of operating with it successfully over many years. So people are used to sudden changes, to a lot of dynamics in the marketplace. But yeah, if I had to speak to some of my colleagues in other markets, that yeah, some of the examples we've seen in the last 12 months are just quite unique internationally seen. But again, that's our reality, and that I think on the policy side, of course, we try to strive for more predictability, which I think is good for everybody in the industry in terms of investments and kind of outlook. It's not always possible, uh, but it is something we continue to promote. We also continue to promote for, I think, a fair business environment in the sense of undue limitations or undue bureaucracy. Let's try to limit that and really invest behind growth for the industry, because there needs to be many elements in place to enable that growth. It's not only the number of outlets, or you have to think about the number of depots, the number of operators in the market. All of that needs to conjunction grow to enable the total beer market to develop. So there are quite a number of elements, but absolutely, I think India is one of the most regulated beer markets, and that makes it not an easy environment. And I think that's also why, you see sometimes smaller players struggle, because it might look as if bring some products to the market and there you go, but really operating that successfully in across many years and across many states, it's not so easy, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, if you were to put it, when you came in and in last 3 years, do you think regulation has remained the same, become slightly better, or become worse? What would you like? How would you put that?
I think net, I would say it's become slightly better. So I think there are always a couple of states. If you say a few move forward, there will always be one or two moving backwards. I think that's also the reality. But I think by and large, we have seen a few states lowering taxation, a few states experimenting with differential taxation, allowing from time to time some new models like online delivery, some kind of rationalization of other things like opening hours or legal drinking age. So I think with that, I would say net it's been a positive. But yes, at the same time, to what I said earlier, it sometimes remains quite volatile, and policies can overnight again change. But all in all, considered, I think it has been moving balance positive.
But are you able to engage with some of these states or at all, or like it's very unilateral? What
Oh,
happens?
so that engagement is definitely there, but it is fair to say that it doesn't mean that if you engage that or of course things are followed. No, I mean you have to continuously engage, explain, show what other states maybe are doing, what are some best practices that can be considered. In the end of the day, it's not about pointing, let's say, to advantages for us as manufacturing, but as total beer industry with all the stakeholders and participants, whether it's about employment, investment, revenue collection, all those elements I think can be looked at. And I think there is a common denominator that if it's a predictable, conducive business environment where all the stakeholders can contribute and develop the market, I think that's in everybody's interest. We have examples where in certain states that is the case, but there are also certain states that might be on that path, but make a sudden change or hit a speed bump, and things are different. So that is also again the reality. But it's about us taking our leadership role and promoting those policies, and then hopefully it takes only a couple of states to show that can actually generate value. And we've also seen some states, of course, copying what others are doing, or similar fashion operate the model. And I think then you get a bit of a spin-off of a few of those good practices, and then hopefully that more and more is then taken on.
Mm. Then moving on to the growth drivers, and you've briefly touched upon some of these even now. But let's say we talked about penetration. When you look at penetration, what are the key factors? Demographics, one point you talked about, or income levels, and so on. So, and you guys have made enough statements saying that the best in India is yet to come. But if you were to try and quantify some of this in terms, what is the total addressable market? Where do you think how fast do you think it is growing? Uh, if you can put some color on that, will be great.
Yeah, we in terms of numbers, we think that under a normal, stable regulatory situation, the volume growth can be kind of like an 8% per year. The per capita consumption today is only two on a kind of total Indian level. However, if you look among beer drinkers, if you take that slice, it's much higher. So once people are open to consumption of beer, can be relatively high. We also seen strong growth of people moving into the category, so to say. And then, yeah, it's a journey that sometimes you start with one or two consumptions and move that up over time. So we see pockets within India where, of course, the per capita consumption is much higher than the average. That has to do with climate, with disposable income, with kind of urban versus rural. Also, of course, with kind of adaptation of kind of acceptance of the beer category. And I think to my earlier point, that's also a journey to more and more establish it as something that can be considered as everybody's pattern of consumption, etc. So it should be not seen as something that is kind of maybe taboo or something shady. No, it can be just part of everybody's consumption. Of course, due respect for all religious, social, cultural considerations that might be there. But yeah, to the point on data, we do think that probably maybe some whatever 80 million people might be drinking beer today. But we think that can increase in absolute terms, but also relative terms. If you look at the total number of alcohol consumptions in India, where we do see that, yeah, beer, of course, is also in competition with other alcohol segments. So it's also our role to make sure the offerings of products, the price points, the route to market are all attractive for people to consider other types of alcohol consumption and move them into beer.
Right. And so this whole beer versus spirits bit. So you think that there is, is it beer versus spirits or beer and spirits? How do you guys think about it? Because as you just mentioned that you can move some of the spirits drinkers into beer, but is that you mean, do you mean that the same spirit guy should actually be also having beer once in a while and spirits? So it's actually the whole alcohol culture going, or you think you can move a spirits person to beer by showing different offerings?
Yeah, probably it's a bit more the latter than the former, because if you look at the price laddering, then if you would consider an alcoholic product, then the price points of spirits just start a lot lower. And actually, the price laddering of spirits is way more developed than beer.
Yeah.
Of course, some intrinsic elements to that, but I think it's our role to continue to develop those price points. But I think if you look at an average mainstream beer product and pricing, it's relatively high priced versus the price laddering of spirits, which starts way at an economy level. And hence, I think, yeah, if people consider from a kind of economic or purchasing price perspective, beer versus spirits, then beer becomes almost like an aspirational product, because you need to then take a couple of steps down up the price ladder to say, oh, now I consider beer. Particularly, of course, the element of taxation doesn't help here. That beer is taxed more on volume often, and then becomes relatively more expensive if you take the alcohol component into account.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of things to continue to work upon, but hence we see that people more and more consider now also beer as a as a good alternative for maybe spirits if they started their journey in spirits. And that is something we continue to have to work upon, given that beer is probably maybe less than 10% of the overall alcohol consumption. So we're only a relatively small category within India from that perspective. So hence that's our job.
Yeah. And I guess partly also beer has been so far mostly considered out of home. Uh, and I guess you guys have launched now campaigns of why you should store beer at home. How, do you think that's kind of a big thing, or how does it compare to, let's say, the rest of the world? Uh,
Also, I think what is also pretty unique about the Indian market is there's not really a strongly developed culture of drinking at home.
right.
That is very different from some of the beer markets I've worked or I've seen, and maybe people on the call might experience themselves, obviously. So, in other words, buying beer, bringing it home, cooling it, drinking it with your family or friends. That's I think it's more the exception than the rule today in many households. So there, I think, it's also an opportunity, and hence, particularly during and after COVID, it's something we have put our efforts on in terms of campaigns and showing kind of examples of kind of social codes in the household and how that beer consumption can play a role, but also campaigns around, beer owning its own, right place in the fridge, for example. So those are elements that will not move the needle, within 1 or 2 months, but I think step by step, it is about building those occasions, showing what could be done. And so that's various angles of packaging, so showing also multi packs and how that can be easily taken home, etc. So again, they're all steps on a long-term journey, I think, but definitely a lot of potential for development.
Right. The other growth driver, which is premiumization, and if I was listening to the earnings call of even Pernod, or in globally, even globally, everybody's still talking about premiumization as a theme. So and here we are in India, which is very probably low base of premiumization. So it seems like a very long runway on premiumization. The way it could be, developed markets are also talking about premiumization. But so what does premiumization mean to you guys? So is it like you're talking about with beer, or things like Heineken or Amstel? Is that what you would call premiumization, or how would you define premiumization? And
Yeah, I think on one important level, it's all about the value extraction you have as a total category. So of course, then you talk quickly about the higher priced products within the category. But I would say that's one definition. If you broaden it up, it's also about the imagery of the category, the experience, the how you fulfill consumer needs on various levels. So if it's about, let's say, functional drinking, so satisfy your thirst, or having one consumption, that's of course very different than having an emotional need or celebrating with friends and really, let's say, having a differentiated product that you can buy. Maybe, if you consume something on a wedding, probably it's going to be very different from what you consume um, with an old-time friend that you're meeting in a pub, something else. So I think the value and the kind of premiumness is in that sense a wide label we can put on it. To your question, absolutely. I think the journey in India is just starting. Talk about volume growth of 8%, probably in Europe. Beer markets might be stable or maybe showing maximum 1% growth. So to extract value from such a market, of course, it's all about premiumization, innovation, about different product types, different pack types, etc. A lot of revenue management initiatives. So those priorities are probably different from India, where it's much more about driving the total category as we have in our strategy. At the same time, making sure that this long-term development of premium and value is something you don't overlook, and you continue to invest already today for what is steadily, of course, becoming more and more important for India. And with that, yeah, we know that brands are not built in 1 or 2 years, but over many, many years by really being consistent in your approach and positioning. So that is also something we take on board and we aim to do already today. While as a segment today and for the total beer market, it's still relatively small. But I think that's a big positive that within a category that is already relatively highly priced, that we do see continuous growth of that premium and the value segment uh, going up, because that shows that consumers are willing to spend that, are willing to experiment, are willing to take more and more choice and kind of repertoire in their behavior. So I think those are, of course, strong fundamentals. And again, it's not unique to India. If you look at how beer markets have developed across decades across the globe, then it's a very typical pattern that more and more choice comes available, that moves away from mainstream into various pricing segments. The number of products coming to the market, the number of choices available is also ever increasing. So I think that that's still at an early stage in India, but very promising.
So, would premiumization necessarily mean improvement in, let's say, margins? Because if I was looking at Heineken numbers versus here, right, the EBIT margins are almost double that of India, right? And that's probably because gross margins are much higher, uh, eh, and I'm just assuming that that means price points are better. Uh, so is like, would that, if I were to look at a very long-term chart and say premiumization, would that actually mean that you would, we could see improvement in EBIT margins, or Indian market is slightly different, you think?
Yeah, I think the international comparison is much more around, first of all, the level of excise and pricing. So here in India, if you sell at 100 to a consumer, the realization for a manufacturer is probably, whatever, 26, 28, where on average it might be, double that for other markets. So I think that shows that the first driver for some of the profitability levels is really around excise and taxation, which, by the way, also has, of course, an impact on the affordability and hence the volume that one achieves in a certain market, which will again impact the benefits of scale that a manufacturer can achieve. So that is really much more structural around the value chain and realization for brewers. But within that, I would say, we should not close our eyes to the opportunity of premiumization. I think in the short run, the premiumization comes still with investments, with building scale, with building the footprint of manufacturing. But of course, as you continue to grow that, you are getting those benefits and you are building those products with more and more consumer pull versus push, if you will. So I think that is an important trend, but absolutely nothing I would say that is within 1 or 2 years. No, I think here we talk about a longer journey for that premium segment to fully get those financial benefits, as well as you do your comparison to let's say global benchmarks might see. But it is one of the factors I think that can, of course, support the profitability increase that we would expect.
Right. And would also premiumization, to actually reach the premiumization goal, would you need to spend much more on advertisement and stuff? Because right now, if I look at your spends, they're not that high, compared to, let's say, even if I look at United Spirits, for example, their percentage of sales that they spend on ads is much higher than what you do. But if you were to kind of try and go more premium, would you have to spend much higher?
I think as a percentage of the top line, normally you would spend more as a percentage on a premium product than on a mainstream product. So I think that's one. I think secondly, you also have to look at the development in the sense that the premium products are all relatively new. If you look at a franchise like Kingfisher, this very strong brand equity just means in itself that you have more goodwill with consumers or more brand recognition, etc. So hence, those two elements also show that most likely you will need to invest more in the premium brands. And simply also they are newer, there's more competition. The higher price points, of course, also enable some of that spend. So I think that is a journey, but of course, we will always calibrate as we go along as to, yeah, what is the right spend level, what is also affordable, what is the competitive scenario. And then, yeah, if you compare it to the spirits industry, of course, those price ladders, to what we said earlier, are already more stretched. The premium price points are much higher versus mainstream if you compare that to beer. So of course that enables some of that investment, which you also need because it's a, almost a circular argument that if you don't spend, you will not have that premium value and recognition from consumers, and hence you will not, kind of justify those price points in the same time. So it's about making sure you invest to make sure that the premium imagery of the product is absolutely there. And from there, yeah, you can also justify the price points, keep on investing, keep on premiumizing the product, etc.
Right. And what's the policy on royalty for, let's say, non Kingfisher brands? Is there a policy there on royalty that?
Yeah, so if the brands are owned by the Heineken International Group or the head office, etc., then the very typical pattern is that you pay a percentage royalty on the revenue the brand generates in the domestic market. Of course, that is all fully aligned to standard transfer pricing, benchmarks, and taxation regimes. So those are the typical setups in contracts that we see across the globe.
Right. Is there a number that you can share, or is that?
No, we don't disclose numbers as such, but you have to reckon then that the more premium or more well-known the brand is, the more higher the royalty rate would be. So the Heineken brand would kind of justify a higher royalty rate than if it's a relatively smaller regional type of international brand. Mm-hmm. But I would say the economics, if I compare to spirits, I think are quite different, and it's usually a smaller amount of the economics are then in terms of royalty. So really a large part of the economics are for the local markets, and that of course economics again are different if you compare spirits to beer, and hence I think for beer it's relatively lower than what I've seen for spirits.
One question on competitive intensity. So you have Bira, then you have some of the craft beer that's coming in. Do you think that's good for the industry because given the penetration level is low, or how do you guys see that?
I would say on balance, it's very positive in the sense that of course competition sometimes they keep us sharp, they keep us on our toes, and I think that's a healthy setup for any market, for any industry. But particularly given the low penetration for beer, the number of innovations, the number of activations being done, the number of choices coming to the market, if that only increases, I think that will help the kind of acceptance of beer, that helps the growth of beer, the penetration, of course, the number of occasions. So I think, of course, we have an important role as a market leader, but I think it's good that if people see opportunities, they see maybe untapped segments in the market that are not yet fully represented, then it all helps to develop the total category. And I think in that sense, of course, there are days when we're not happy with competition, but there are also many days where I think from an industry development perspective, it's very positive. And whether you talk about things like microbreweries or on-trade initiatives, craft beer, or smaller craft variants, I think that all helps to have people kind of engage with the category, to try it out, to find their way as to what is the best proposition or the best proposition at a certain occasion. So with that, I think it's a very good development that more of that investment is happening in India.
Yeah. Last question from me, Berend, then I'll hand over to Pareen. On now you'll be throwing a lot of cash as a company going forward. There's no debt. Is there a capital allocation policy in terms of how would it look like going forward?
Yeah, I think the one step that we have taken now is we've increased the dividend quite a bit. So we now moved from something like a 15% payout to 75% for the last financial year. Of course, now after COVID and with the peak season being quite positive, we will have to upgrade a little bit the capacity. So we'll probably be moving up the investment levels there as well. At the same time, yeah, we have to be, of course, a little bit cautious as to what happened in the last few years, how things can quickly change. So in that sense, we're quite happy that we have this strong balance sheet today. So there's room to do those investments. There's room to increase the dividend, and yeah, from year to year, we'll have to see what is possible. And I think it's testimony to the strong business model that we have. That even during difficult COVID years, we've been able to have a positive cash generation, and that enabled the company to become debt free. And yeah, with the cash balance, it will partly move to dividends. It will partly move to investments to enable the future growth. I think that is a good healthy position.
Yeah. And in terms of numbers, would investment be like 250, 300 crore kind of numbers that you're talking about, or they can steadily increase as well?
Yeah, I think that would be steadily increasing. So this year we'll probably be looking at something like 250 crore. Yeah. But if you really talk about expanding the capacity in a meaningful way, then probably it will move up to maybe 400 crores or even beyond. So it depends a little bit on the phasing and what type of investment. If it's a real greenfield, then the pickup might even be higher. If it's a gradual expansion of existing breweries, then you're more like a maybe 400 crore level. So that is really subject to where that growth happens and what are the opportunities to expand, because of course you're also dependent on where you get licenses and where you get permissions to invest. So those will govern a little bit those levels. But of course, yeah, during COVID we were at kind of lower levels given the environment at that point in time.
Sure.
So going forward, I think that would go to a higher level.
Right. Pareen, over to you.
Sure. Berend, just continuing with the question that you just answered to Sanjeev on capital allocation, I also just wanted to understand at this point of time, we have never heard too much about UBL thinking about any kind of acquisition in the market. Any kind of basically your strategy has been gaining more market share with your existing brands. With you throwing up so much cash in the future, even after allocating for plant expansion, etc., do you think this kind of proposition would be something that UBL will ever consider?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely under consideration. It's not only, I would say, that because we have a cash surplus that now we are kind of only looking at it from this point onwards. We have been reviewing these things in the past. We will continue to review it. We are not absolutely open to such options. I think it's more about, is it the right opportunity at the right price, fitting really the business model that we have. I think many of the opportunities, of course, are today maybe relatively small, maybe relatively young. As I think we look at the market and kind of investment in brands from a long-term perspective, yeah, we will of course look at things like, hey, is this something we could launch ourselves, invest behind, consistently build, or is it something really unique, really powerful that we think can immediately add a lot of value to our portfolio and make sense to acquire as such. So it all depends on such opportunity. But certainly we're not saying no, or we're not saying forefront that we're not open to those kind of acquisitions. So it will all depend, on the right brand proposition or portfolio, how that fits with our existing portfolio.
Sure. And just to add to it, India has seen also a lot of robustness in non-alcoholic drinks. And we are seeing the growth rates of the non-alcoholic drinks also doing pretty well. Given UBL has a portfolio which is in that category, are we looking at this category more seriously, expanding plans, having aggressive targets for the non-alcoholic part of our portfolio, or you think that's going to be the next strategy, as at this point of time you are focusing on beer?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that we started on a journey of non-alcoholic beverages. We have 2 products there. We have been continuously investing behind that, expanding the distribution, the footprint, optimizing the pricing and the packaging along the way. That is what we continue to do. We continue to invest behind it. At the same time, I think it's also fair to say that our core business model almost is like beer, the alcoholic part of beer. I think there we have still a lot of work to do, a lot of opportunity. So that remains the key focus. And I think going too much in adjacent categories or how you want to define it might take the focus a little bit away from, I think, the huge opportunity we have still in the alcoholic part of the portfolio. So yes, we do want to invest. We do want to offer that the choice. We do want to develop the market in that way, but again, in a calibrated way, where I think the opportunity in alcoholic part of the portfolio is also still quite high.
Sure. So beer market remains exposed to seasons of barley and glass prices a lot. In your 3 years into the company, do you think there is scope for change in procurement policy, or there are some things that you need to tie up so that long-term volatility is not seen in the business? Anything that you would like to change in the procurement policy?
No, I think it's not about so much maybe change, because we already, for quite some time, I would operate with a long-term perspective on the market. So of course there are contracts short-term in nature, but for our big suppliers, for the big categories, we work with the key suppliers on 3 to 5 year outlooks, so that we make sure that hopefully investments can be done in a timely way, that capacity is there in the right points in the market. Also to your point on barley, we have a contract farming program where we really actively work with large group of farmers to enable training, enable the right seed, the varieties of barley that hopefully attract the highest yields. So we're actively partnering with them, because we might look at pricing from 1 year to the next, but we know that we will be in the market for buying barley for hopefully many decades. So it's really in our interest to develop that in a strong way. I think, however, the reality is, of course, that there are huge economic swings, not only in, let's say, beer, but other categories and industries that also to a certain extent rely on the same supplier base. And we know that building capacities, for example, in glass or cans, is not a 3 months or six months time horizon. So fortunately, those shocks in over demand, more demand or more supply will be there from time to time, and those are the economic realities, I think, for many industries.
Sure. Berend, a very financial question. We did bring in a lot of efficiencies during your tenure in the company, reviewing the employee line, bringing more efficiency there. As the next CFO steps in a couple of days, is there any low-hanging fruit with respect to operating efficiencies which can be brought to the business, which you think is more efficiency-led, and where do you think long-term margins can be? I agree with premiumization, etc. I'm saying more below the gross line. Is there efficiencies, and where do you think we should look at UBL over 4-5 years point of view with EBITDA margins?
Yeah, I think the let's say low-hanging fruit as such is not that easily obtainable because as a business, particularly during COVID, of course, we have done a lot of work, also looking at benchmarks with other Heineken markets, with other beer industries, also with external parties looking at the right processes, etc. However, at the same time, we know that the market quickly continues to develop, new technologies become available. Digital, of course, is on a fast pace of development. So it's not about saying that, yeah, whatever is the conclusion today will be the conclusion for tomorrow. So it's a continuous review of what is possible in which parts of the business. I would not call it low-hanging fruit, but at the same time, I think it's every CFO or management team's role to make sure you continue to look at the efficiency, on the effectiveness, and with that continue to drive cost out. On the margin potential, I think for us the first step now after COVID and of course cycling to the commodity push that we currently witness is I think get back to levels that we've seen in kind of 17, 18, 19, to get back to those type of margins. But hopefully, as we continue to increase the scale of the business, as we have larger and larger breweries, as we have more and more products being sourced within the state, I think over time, those margins can expand. But that all goes. I mean, we don't operate in a market in isolation. We are in a very competitive business where a lot of market participants are pursuing the growth and the future market share, of course, for their products. So we always have to calibrate our spend levels, our investments behind product, because if you look today at the profit pool for the beer industry, probably it's not so different from us as a market leader in terms of what the profitability is. But it shows that as long as participants also are kind of either operating at losses or accepting losses, then as a market leader, again, you cannot go in isolation and have an absolute target a certain profitability level, because you will also have to look at the investments and the relative competitiveness. However, with that, I don't say that today's margins are there as a kind of as given. No, I think we can should first of all target the kind of pre-COVID levels that were achieved, and then hopefully from there continue to move them up.
Sure. Thanks, Berend. I'll hand it over to Sanjeev.
Thank you so much, Berend, and for spending time, and wish you all the very best for your next endeavor.
Wish you all the best, Berend.
And thank you very much. Really
hope to see you sometime
today.
Again. So.
Yes, looking forward to that. Thank you very much, and thank you for all your questions and time available.
Thank you.
Thank you.